We all know that in 1962, a new hero was introduced to audiences around the world in the form of a British spy known as James Bond. Little did we know how much this new genre would impact the way we would consume entertainment for the next decade. The one thing for sure was that the James Bond craze began taking over the 1960s, and how that influence translated to television. Here are 15 television shows that were created as a result of the spy craze of the 60s. Danger Man, also known as Secret Agent for American television, 1960 to 1968. Danger Man was created before the Bond film franchise got into full swing, and Ian Fleming was actually brought on board during the development phase of the series, but left before it was finished. Patrick McGoohan, who had been considered for Bond, was already 2 years into production on Danger Man. He stayed with the series until 1968, when he did not renew his contract for a fourth series, as he was in production for The Prisoner. Like all series at the time, by 1967, the Bond influence showed in its villains and gadgets. But McGoohan didn't want any guns or emphasis on female entanglements. He felt that those were gratuitous and unnecessary. The Avengers, 1961 to 1969. One of my personal favorites, in particular the Diana Rigg years, and of course Laurie Johnson's iconic theme music. While this actually began a year before Dr. No appeared on the big screen, we have to consider Ian Fleming had already published 9 of his Bond novels before any film production began, going back as far as 1952. The Avengers stands out as a time capsule of the 60s, capitalizing on several genres that audiences were eager to consume, from action-adventure to mystery and science fiction fantasy. The Avengers holds a very special place in television history. The Saint, 1962 to 1969. Another British series that would later join American television in the mid-60s was The Saint. Character Simon Templar, played by none other than later Bond, Roger Moore. The Saint character was based on a series of books written in the 1920s by Leslie Charteris, perfect to repurpose in the age of the Cold War and espionage era. Each episode of The Saint typically features Simon Templar getting involved in various capers, often entangled in espionage, theft, and international intrigue. The show's episodic nature allowed for a wide variety of storylines, from solving murders to thwarting elaborate criminal schemes. The series was known for its blend of action, mystery, and lighthearted humor, all elements that Roger Moore would employ later on during his time as James Bond. The Man from U.N.C.L.E, 1964 to 1968. The Man from U.N.C.L.E is a show that actually had input from Bond author Ian Fleming. After being approached by the show's creator, Norman Felton, the original title of the show was Ian Fleming's Solo. Fleming proposed 2 characters to Felton for the show: Napoleon Solo, who would be played by American actor Robert Vaughn, and April Dancer, later to be played by Stephanie Powers in the spin-off series The Girl from U.N.C.L.E. With it now being 1964, audiences have been treated to 3 Bond films, with the most recent being Goldfinger. However, with The Man from U.N.C.L.E becoming so popular, producers turned 8 episodes into feature films released to the cinema, with added film sequences not seen on television, and even spiced it up some with more adult material. Plus, the bonus was that audiences could see these films in color, which was a big deal at the time, as most viewers were watching the show on black and white TV sets. Plenty of outrageous villains and gadgets, completely cashing in on the James Bond craze that was taking over the world. Jonny Quest, 1964 to 1965. Yes, even the famed cartoonists Hanna-Barbera got in on the Bond craze and created their second animated series for primetime television, the first being The Flintstones. Jonny Quest, while obviously a cartoon, had all the great elements of James Bond gadgets of the 1960s, with Johnny's father, Dr. Benton Quest, a scientist, always working for the U.S. government on new weapons technology or exposing counterintelligence villains, usually the Chinese or Russians. Taking advantage of the anti-communist sentiment of the early 60s, the pilot episode entitled The Mystery of the Lizard Men makes this clear as a submarine used by Russian agents or exploiting their new weapon, the laser, on unsuspecting ships. The series continues to make use of gadgets like hovercrafts, hydrofoils, flying jetpacks like in Thunderball, and the hypersonic airplane used by Race Bannon and Dr. Quest. One of the best, if not the best, cartoons in the Hanna-Barbera catalog. As a side note, the Flintstones also got in on the Bond craze with an episode in the 5th season called Dr. Sinister, where Fred and Barney lament at the beginning about how boring their lives are after watching a J. Bond rock movie on television. And of course, the feature film in 1966 titled The Man Called Flintstone, which was a complete parody of spy and Bond films. It also marked the end of the original run of the Flintstones on network television. I Spy, 1965 to 1968. I Spy was one of those unique television shows that not only showcased two actors as the main leads, but it was the first time an African American was placed in the lead. Bill Cosby played Alexander Scott, and Robert Culp as Kelly Robinson. Two American secret agents posing as tennis bums. Unlike several of the other spy shows that were mostly produced on studio backlots, I Spy was like Bond in the fact that they did many international locations. This is surprising as for television production, it's expensive to shoot on location. Very much embracing the Cold War era in storyline plots, mostly pitting them against Chinese or Russian counter-agents, helping defectors, gaining crucial weapon technology, while living the carefree life of two men at the apex of their physical and lethal skills. The series ran for 3 seasons, ending in 1968. Get Smart, 1965 to 1970. What do you get when Mel Brooks and Buck Henry watch James Bond movies? A television series about a bumbling secret agent and a comical version of everything Bond does, from the gadgets to the villains.
My name is the Craw.
The Craw?
Oh, not the Craw, the Craw.
Oh, yes, the Craw.
Mel Brooks said about the series, do everything they do in the Bond films, and then stretch it about half an inch. At first, producers fought Brooks and Henry and said they wanted a dog on the show to make it more lovable. And Maxwell should have a mother to go home to and explain everything. They were trying to keep it like Leave It to Beaver, but Brooks flat out said no. They even had their own spy syndicate like Spectre called Chaos. Maxwell using his shoe as a telephone, Chief was his M, and Agent 99 was of course the pretty girl. Only from the mind of Mel Brooks could you get a true parody of Bond, James Bond. The Wild Wild West, 1965 to 1969. The 1960s television was full of family shows, variety shows, sitcoms, and while the Bond franchise was catching fire and heavily influencing TV, the other big genre on TV during the 1960s was Westerns. So what better way to keep audiences who loved Westerns happy is create a Western character who is also a secret agent. Enter West, James West, with his faithful sidekick Artemis Gordon, otherwise his Q. The show not only used Bond motifs of megalomaniac villains and plots to overthrow the government, but also adding fantasy. When Michael Garrison, the show's creator, pitched it to the network, he said, "It's James Bond on horseback." The show became hugely popular with younger audiences, mostly because they were already hip to 007, and anything about spies was a win for the audience and the network. Wild Wild West lasted 4 seasons. Honey West, 1965 to 1966. While the Avengers was taking British and American TVs by storm, Honey West was the network's answer to the popularity of Emma Peel. The title character, played by Anne Francis, used many special James Bond-style gadgets to help her solve her mysteries and cases. While there was only one season produced, they did manage to turn out 30 episodes, all with intriguing plot lines like Episode 3, The Abominable Snowman, an espionage storyline about the villains using snow globes to smuggle cocaine. One of the main reasons the show was canceled, as it couldn't compete with Gomer Pyle, USMC. Mission Impossible, 1966 to 1973. At the height of the spy craze, along comes Mission Impossible. While the show relied on an ensemble of team members to stop the bad guys from creating worldwide chaos or smuggling Nazi gold, it very much followed the new formula of fighting against Cold War enemies, typically behind the Iron Curtain. Inventive use of spy gadgets, and the skills of the team. There's no denying Mission Impossible was heavily influenced on the popularity of James Bond and other successful spy shows of the 60s. The Girl from U.N.C.L.E, 1966 to 1967. Like any good television network that wants to cash in on the success of the spy genre, thinking anything in the vein of James Bond should be a hit, decided on tapping into the original show's success. Why not A Girl from U.N.C.L.E as well? Using the character April Dancer, created by Ian Fleming himself, it followed the same formula as the previous series. The show struggled to find an audience, and sadly, Stephanie Powers, along with the show, received bad reviews from critics. It lasted only one season. The Baron, 1966 to 1967. Another single-season show, The Baron, starred Steve Forrest, an American antiques dealer and sometimes undercover agent who drove a Jensen CV-8, which upon a glance gives the impression of the Aston Martin. One of the Bond trademarks seemed to be all agents needed to drive a roadster of some type, thanks to Sean Connery. The show was a British production based on a book series by John Creasy under the pen name Anthony Morton. Despite the show only being on for one season, it did release 2 feature films for theatrical release compiled from a couple of 2-part episodes cleverly re-edited. Many felt the show was simply a clone of The Saint with Roger Moore and Danger Man. But that's what Hollywood does best, copy a successful genre until it gets run into the ground and then moves on to the next new shiny thing. The Prisoner, 1967 to 1968. One of the most puzzling yet popular series, The Prisoner, which has now become a cult classic, has as many questions as it does answers when it comes to exactly what is the show truly about. While most certainly it involves a spy who has had enough of the agency and resigns, only for the agency to kidnap him and take him to a village where he is now referred to as Number 6. And he lives in an apartment that looks exactly like the one he has in London. He has everything provided to him that he will need, such as a place to live, money, all in an idyllic setting. But the agency needs to know what secrets does he still possess in his mind, often torturing him as he continues to attempt to escape and discover the biggest question of all: who is Number 1? Many consider the show a sequel to Danger Man. McGowan developed the show and took advantage of the spy craze that had viewers glued to their TV sets for the better part of the decade. The Prisoner was only one season, and its final episode, Fallout, was one of the most anticipated episodes on British television ever. And when it aired and was ambiguous at best, it left viewers outraged. And Patrick McGowan claimed for his own safety, he actually had to go into hiding. The Champions, 1968 to 1969. Another espionage show along the lines of Mission Impossible, only with telepathy and a touch of science fiction. Like most other spy series of the era, it mostly involved villains that were either Chinese or Nazis hiding out in South America. The Champions was created for British audiences, but was exported to America on NBC for one season. And our final show, It Takes a Thief, 1968 to 1970. Taken from a made-for-television movie, while its storylines are steeped in Cold War spy themes, and Alexander Mundy, played by Robert Wagner, is a James Bond type of former cat burglar. The inspiration for the series was initially based on Alfred Hitchcock's To Catch a Thief, running for 3 seasons. Alexander Mundy is sent by the American government to use his cat burglar skills to spy, expose gold smugglers, stop dictators, and do whatever was required to give the Americans the advantage in whatever the situation was. This was in exchange for his freedom, with the classic line from the show's opening credits, "Let me get this straight. You want me to steal?" Like Bond, Mundy was a playboy and to sophisticate, driving the best cars, drinking the best booze, and of course, kissing the hottest girls. The show was a huge success and made Robert Wagner a household name. That's our 15 spy shows inspired by the popularity of the James Bond franchise. Which one of these shows were your favorites? Did you watch them in their original runs on TV or in reruns? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.